Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Roy Williams. I'm President and CEO of the Greater Oklahoma City Chamber, and I'm going to sort of be your MC this morning. And first of all, I want to thank all of you for joining us. This is a really special day, I think, in the history of Oklahoma City and the metropolitan area, so thanks for sharing it. Roughly 18 months ago, the Chamber and Oklahoma City community leaders partnered with the Brookings Institution and the Project for Public Spaces to encourage creativity and collaboration in Oklahoma City's Innovation District. Today, we're really thrilled to hear the report findings of this 18-month project and to have a discussion about what the next steps will be as we look to the future of the Innovation District. Before we hear from our distinguished guests from Brookings and the Project for Public Spaces, I'd like to take just a moment to recognize the key partners who really helped make this happen and provided the funding and the leadership to this very meaningful project. It includes the City of Oklahoma City, the Presbyterian Health Foundation, the Oklahoma Health Center Foundation, the Alliance of Economic Development for Oklahoma City, the Chamber, the Oklahoma Medical Research Foundation, and the University of Oklahoma. These 7 key partners were the ones who were sort of the backbone of this initiative and helped play a vital role in making it and bringing it to where it is today. Again, your collaboration, resources, and insight make these kinds of projects possible. So thank those institutions and also all of you. I'd also like to refresh you on the work that kind of has brought us here today, and we're going to spend some time later on in the program really hearing from the folks that directly led this work since 2015. I said earlier, this is an 18-month study to date about the district. You're going to hear about strengths, weaknesses, quality of place, the interplay between innovation, quality places, and economic growth. We're one of 2, and you're going to hear this, 2 pilot projects, the other being Philadelphia, for the Bass Initiative on Innovation and Placemaking. So we're kind of setting history here. This is sort of the first time Brookings and PPS have collaborated in a project quite like this. And the purpose of it really is to come up and catalyze a new approach that really integrates reinforcing the benefits of vibrant public spaces, innovative urban economies, and inclusive growth. And as all of you know who are from Oklahoma City, this isn't really a new concept, and certainly the areas that they have studied are already known for successes. We've already had successes, especially in bioscience, medicine, and other areas. But with the addition now of the GE Global Research Facility, the opportunities for collaboration have really increased significantly. So we're really excited to learn today about the initiative's focus on quality of life, and creating a really unique community within our community and the identity of this innovation district. And we're really confident the implementation of this report that you've seen is going to help us in our economic development efforts, help us attract new companies and employees, and really give us a valuable framework that's going to encourage innovation at a whole new level. We have a great lineup of speakers today. In the interest of time, you can find their bios in your programs. I'm not going to read them to you. I'm going to bring Bruce Katz up, but before I do, I want to give you one other little insight. Dr. Betts is here from the University of Central Oklahoma, and you probably don't understand why I mention his name, but it just so happened to be that something he did is kind of what caused this. In his distinguished lecture series back in January of 2015, he had Bruce come speak to the university. And then he invited a small group of us to have dinner with Bruce at the Metro on the night of the 28th. I had the privilege of sitting next to Bruce, and I took advantage of that. We got to know each other. We talked about the possibility of doing this kind of stuff, and I'm sure Bruce kind of dismissed us as, well, just another interested group. But it didn't turn out that way. We struck up a relationship. We struck up a conversation. He and other Brookings people came to Oklahoma City a couple times. And so 18 months ago, it formalized. So you never know how these things begin. You never know what starts it and how they happen. But that was the genesis of how this happened in Oklahoma City over a dinner one night at the Metro, thanks to a university president bringing in a distinguished lecturer. So that's kind of the history of how we got here. So I want to welcome Bruce Katz to the stage to provide an overview of the final report. Bruce is the inaugural Centennial Scholar at the Brookings Institution, where he focuses on the challenges and opportunities of global urbanization. He's assumed this cross-institutional role in January of 2016, so relatively new after 20 years as Vice President and Co-Director of the Brookings Metropolitan Policy Program, which he founded in 1996. So Bruce, it is all yours. Welcome.
So good morning, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to be back in Oklahoma City, and we are very excited by the potential of this place. We think you've got a really unique position in play, which we will talk through this morning. This is going to be a tag team effort. After I speak, Scott Andes will come up and talk about some of our recommendations around innovation and technology. And then Meg Walker, our partner from the Project for Public Spaces, will come up and talk about some of our placemaking suggestions. And then my close colleague Jennifer Vey, who's the co-director of the BASS Initiative on Innovation and Placemaking, will come up and talk about inclusion. So this has been a team effort, and we wanted you to see all members of the team. And we do this work around a lot of places in the United States and outside the United States. I think what makes Oklahoma City different is that you've had a long history of public-private, civic, university collaboration. The MAPS project is well known in the United States and frankly increasingly known outside the United States. And so, when Don brought me here and Roy asked if Brookings would engage, we want to engage in places that ultimately want to get stuff done. We don't, at Brookings, like to do reports. We like to work with places, that essentially engage with us both on the diagnostic and then on the action side. And I think we have that here, and we're very excited about where this heads. So let me start, and let's see if the technology is with us today. Sometimes you just have to point. So Jason, you might have to advance it, I suppose, yeah. Well, I'll say one thing before we advance it, which is Bertrand Russell once said that the sign of an educated person is to be deeply moved by statistics. So we're not going to put too many statistics before you, but enough to make you feel like you're at a graduate seminar. So let me start with this. This is the geography that we're going to talk about today. It's a different geography than normally people have discussed in the past because it combines the medical district, which now includes GE's research facility. You jump over 235 and you go to Automobile Alley. This is 1.3 square miles. It's 0.002% of the landmass of Oklahoma State. But in our view, what is happening in the United States and across the world is these relatively small geographies are co-locating and concentrating advanced research, medical campuses across multiple sectors with mature companies, entrepreneurs, startup and scale-ups, incubators, co-working spaces, investors, all in an urban environment. This is what we call innovation districts. And when I came here, and Scott and Jennifer and Meg came here a couple years ago, this space, which again is relatively small given the expanse of this metropolis and given the expanse of this state, is clearly a platform for innovative activity. And so a lot of our focus has been not the typical economic development, the metro scale or even the city scale, but this little bit of real estate and what it can ultimately produce. So what we did is we talked to a lot of people because, quantitative analysis will only get you so far. You want to have qualitative interviews. So we talked to quite a number of people across multiple sectors. You all put together these task forces around innovation and placemaking and governance, and you held some really interesting sessions with us and without us, with a broad group of people from different parts of the community. And from that, we've really been able to distill both the diagnostic, but more importantly, where do you go from here? So what's the moment here? Well, bottom line is we are in a different kind of period of economic evolution and economic restructuring. And if you go back to quite some time ago, 100 years ago, 75 years ago, the places that grew up in the United States and dominated our economy and frankly dominated the world economy were sort of single technology focused or single sector focused. Think about, Pittsburgh and steel, or Silicon Valley and San Jose early on in semiconductors. But when you think about how the world's evolving today, the places that are really at the vanguard of economic prosperity are those places that are seeing a convergence of technologies and of sectors. I mean, we all get into our car these days, and it's basically a computer on wheels. For people my age, I still can't quite figure out how any of it works, so then I turn to my daughter and she just hits a button and suddenly we're on the phone again. But it's the Internet of Things, it's the convergence of technologies. And when you think about a Denver or a Pittsburgh or a Boston, what you're seeing is the convergence of different kinds of sectors and technologies in different places. The U.S. is a highly differentiated economy. Like, that's what makes us so strong. Every place has a series of special assets and advantages based on certain legacy investments and legacy location. So when you think about Pittsburgh and robotics and autonomy, and the interface with some of their life sciences, you begin to get a sense of how these places perform. You're at the convergence of energy and healthcare. There are very few places in the world today that are at that intersection, right? And when you sort of say, oh, energy and healthcare, the first reaction is, what do those two things have to do with each other? Aren't they just so radically different that we can't even begin to have a conversation, right? There are obviously two major sectors of the domestic and global economy, major employers, major innovators, right? But they do share a bunch of stuff. And Steve Prescott and GE have been working on finding that sweet spot. They share robotics, they share imaging, they share sensors, they share fluid flow dynamics, right? In energy, they're pushing sort of fluid through rocks. In healthcare, they're pushing fluid through people. I know it's not exactly the same thing, but it's fluid flow dynamics, right? So this is two sectors, both here, that literally are next door to each other, that can co-invent and co-create together. And that's when the magic happens. That's when you basically create the next set of products and the next set of processes that rock the world. And obviously, GE as a company is a company that does both, right? It does the healthcare side, it does the energy side, multiple sectors of energy. So within one company, you have that synergistic effect and the potential for convergence. This is where the economy is going. And those places that can recognize their ability to pull together what's on the surface seem like just radically different things and take it to the next stage are those places that are going to be very wealthy and very prosperous, not just for companies, not just for talented workers, but for a broad citizenry. So what's Oklahoma City's position? Because it's really important, I think, to start with that kind of framework and then begin to talk about sectors and geography and skills. but we're in a different kind of moment today. Well, what are you good at? You know, I mean, this is really what we ask all the time, and it's pretty clear here. I mean, and folks are pretty cognizant about it, right? I mean, you're good in certain energy sectors, you're good in healthcare, you've got institutions, major institutions, dedicated to this, and you're good in aeronautics. And a lot of this stuff, you know, in terms of the companies and the researchers, there's sort of like a top line that people know. Like, well, you got the Tinker Air Force Base out there, right? But as we've learned, as you've gone through this process, you also have a lot of assets that are sort of hidden in plain sight. You know, the FAA has a lot of people here who actually do a lot of medical-related research, right? Who knew, you know? But that's when you begin to sort of look behind the curtain. You can see the strength, the breadth, the depth of these different sectors. So where are these places located? There's a lot of concentration here in the downtown, in the near downtown. It's fairly typical of the United States that we have tended to concentrate a lot of our institutional assets in the cores of American cities. And American cities and metropolitan areas are very large. We've had a large portion of period of depopulation and decentralization of the core. But when you think about advanced industry assets, they're highly concentrated in the cores, and then they relate to other clusters. And when we put on that geography was UCO because of their focus on STEM skills, absolutely fundamental, and obviously Tinker and some of the other suburban clusters. But this is our particular focus because, you know, from our perspective, what is happening is the market, because of this convergence phenomenon, is rewarding proximity. It's revaluing density. It wants the mashup of sectors, and talented workers want to be in places where they can live, work, and play, right? So all of that is essentially the market and the demographic dynamic behind innovation districts. And every major competitive middleweight city in the United States has one of these because of the investments we've made in basic science and applied research. And you have one of them in a very interesting space because it's so close, not just to Automobile Alley, but to other parts of your city, which are very authentic and very vibrant and very vital. All this is connected. Now, of course, you do have a freeway running through it, but, you know, freeways can always be capped, but we can talk more about that at another point. So, again, very small space, only 1.3 square miles, right? But a whole bunch of jobs and a whole bunch of value creation here. And we're at, like, early stage, right? Because, you know, if you're an investor, whether you're an investor in real estate or you're an investor in companies, this is the geography you want to be looking at. Not everything's going to be located in this district, but because of the research and the commercialization of research, this is going to be the platform, this is going to be the generator of the growth. So we looked at this, and the report is online, and you can go to www.brookings.edu or go to the Chamber site, and you can read this. Please send us your comments, you know. If you want to grade us, go for it. But what we're basically finding is a place with some very unique strengths that haven't quite reached their full potential, partly because this geography is shifting and the convergence is shifting. So again, 1.3 square miles, you know, Oklahoma full is about 70,000 square miles, but it concentrates 77% of your NIH funding, right? Because, you know, when our national R&D agencies, whether the NIH, NSF, our military agencies, our energy agencies, when they invest, they don't disperse the funding. They go where the talent is. This is merit-driven, evidence-driven investment. So this is a high concentration for an entire state. We're not even talking about a metro here. We're talking about an entire state high concentration. And then you're really good at a whole bunch of stuff, not surprisingly, in the health science, life science area. On the left, what you see is sort of volume of publications. On the right, what you see is quality of publications. Like, how many times are you getting cited by other peers, by other researchers, by other scientists? And what you basically show is there's a whole bunch of areas of the bio world that you do very well at, right? And that's the way it is for just any part of the U.S., right? I mean, it's not like bio is one unified thing. It's all these separate sort of segments, and you can see what you're good at. Now, we looked at a bunch of peers, some of whom, like Birmingham, are smaller metropolitan areas than you. Others, like Buffalo and St. Louis or Indy, are bigger than you. But we were trying to get a sense of the volume of the research funding that you were getting from the public side, and you can tell, it's highly concentrated. But compared to these other sort of peers or aspirational cities, you're not quite at the same level. So there needs to be some sort of growth there as you go forward. So that's the first piece, R&D concentration, because advanced industries basically depend on R&D and then the commercialization. So here's the commercialization side. This is the way the economy works, right? It's like not that complicated, but we generally tend to think about the entrepreneur in the garage having like a light bulb moment. This is like the Steve Jobs myth or something of how the U.S. economy works. Actually, what you need is an ecosystem, right? And a network of institutions and investors that are supportive of the commercialization of research. So you get research dollars to HSC, companies form and commercialize the research. You got a bunch of institutions that are very smart about nurturing the companies, mentoring the companies, giving them the kind of capital they need to begin to play out their ideas. When all goes well, someone comes in and acquires the company. There's an exit, right? Not maybe for the entire company, for a portion of the company that has serious value. And then, there's a spin-off, and the company just keeps on going, This is basically how the U.S. economy works at the advanced level, particularly in the bio and the life sciences field. And you've created, in your medical district, essentially an ecosystem, right? And if you could basically continue to support that and to strengthen that and to build off your base, still low, but it's a decent starting point in different sectors, you'll get more wins. You'll get more shots on goal. You'll get more entrepreneurship. You'll get serial entrepreneurship. That's when you're successful. The bottom line is it's still not happening at the scale, though. It's not just that your volume in total of R&D is low, is that the ability to commercialize research, and here we're looking at other research institutions that get about between 100 and 200 million of public R&D a year to figure out, well, how much commercialization is happening, what kind of licensing is happening. So there needs to be more volume, and there needs to be more accelerant and sort of revving up of the system. And then we get to the connection side, right? Because what we really are sort of looking at here is not just what's happening within that 1 square miles, which is really important, and that's where the ecosystem sits, but how do you begin to connect to other major companies and other major regional assets? This is not about, roads or bus transit or light rail. This is about connections, people to people, firm to firm, researchers to research. I mean, true collaboration across these institutional assets. Bottom line, when you think about the energy sector in this place, you are way above average on the research side. You're way above average on the employment side for the region as a whole. Not surprising, right? But within the district, and you now have this incredible GE facility, you don't have an enormous amount of employment. But put that aside, The real issue from our perspective, and this is from interviews, it's less from the quantitative research, is people will say to us explicitly, there just is not that much connection between these sectors. We know they exist, we know they're important, we know there are a lot of companies, you literally can walk to some of this stuff, but there just isn't that kind of history of strong linkages that are ultimately leading to what we want, right? Product innovation, process innovation, more investment, more companies, more jobs, more tax revenues, all the prosperity stuff. So, you know, the data tells us a lot, the interviews tell us more. And frankly, compared to a lot of other metropolitan areas, I mean, this is fairly typical because we all sort of exist within our guilds and our disciplines where we have specialized expertise in certain areas, and it's hard to get outside of that. But go back to that slide about the relationship between energy and healthcare, robotics, imaging, sensors, fluid flow, right? It's amazing I'm even saying that, right? There are connections here, and at the science level, and at the business level, and at the product level, we can mine that. Quality of life. So this is really important. It's much more important than it used to be. Because again, if we went back 15 years and someone said, where's the innovative economy? We would have gotten into a car at this hotel, driven 20 miles, and gone to a science park where a company would have been isolated and insulated, and a good day was when they were serving something decent in the basement cafeteria, right? That's what innovation was before. It was everyone living in their silo companies. Well, now we are trying to be in very different kinds of environments, amenities, mixed use, vibrancy, where you're as likely to have a new idea or a new product innovation by going to coffee slingers and seeing someone at lunch, right? Than you are by doing it just within your company. And the major companies in the world are now crowdsourcing innovation because you can only pack so many R&D, brilliant scientists within one company. Why not crowdsource it across multiple institutions, researchers, and so forth? So you want the sort of bump and mingle effect, right? You want the collision effect. You want to have places where it's just natural for people to collide with each other. You have a bunch of that in the health district. The Stanton Young, I mean, this is, great architecture, great landscaping. When programmed, it really creates an opportunity for collisions. And then you have, this OU physician, I think it's like once a week, food truck. I'm from Brooklyn, so I don't eat from food trucks. But in any event, I understand the phenomenon. But it creates an opportunity for people to get out and engage with each other. But when you step back and look at this district, what do we have? We have a district built in the 50s, right? I mean, it's no different from Stanford Research Park in Palo Alto. It's no different from, Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. These were all built at a certain time, right? They are auto-dependent, they are auto-focused. It's sort of interesting that they concentrate a lot of health assets, healthcare, but the last thing anyone can do is like walk or bike, right? Because they just weren't built for that. They were sort of built at a different time, a different era, without that kind of mixing and without the options and choices for people. So this is no different than other places. This now has to be remade for a different century. And voila, a short bike ride away, you have Automobile Alley, a place that is highly distinctive, highly walkable to the downtown. I mean, yesterday, I've been coming here for a while, and all I do is, I have to get my coffee slingers fixed. So, Joyce took me, by there later in the afternoon. It's probably a little too late to have the amount of coffee I had. And then I walk back and I see, the lead singer for Flaming Lips has got the Womb, which is some crazy arts facility. I mean, that's what makes cities cities. That's, and it's not just sort of like, well, that's sort of weird. I mean, when you're trying to attract millennials to a city, you're trying to attract companies that are basically in the creative space. I mean, this is what they want. This is what they want. And frankly, again, it's a bike ride, or for a New Yorker, it's a walk from the GE campus and from other parts of the district. So there's a lot of remaking that has to happen here. It's not a rocket science. We know how to do it. You don't have to do it for all the 1 square miles. I mean, Meg, we'll talk more about this later. You've got to find your nodes of activity, right, and activate public spaces and create the programming to get people out of the buildings, literally and figuratively, to engage with each other. And that's when the magic happens, right? So you've got a 1950s medical district, right, incredibly located right next to this amazing downtown you have that over decades with maps you've basically built up with a lot of assets and a lot of advantages. Now you can take this to the next step. Last piece is on growth and opportunity. So there's a lot of growth in this part of the city, more than the city as a whole, not surprising, because these are economic engines and innovation engines. And the jobs are not just for the brainiacs. They're not just for people with 4-year degrees or graduate degrees. A large portion of the jobs in these innovation districts are for people with credentials, with skills that can be gained in community colleges or in special high schools or in on-the-job training. So this is not about that economy, which only exists for the few. It's actually, if we're smart about this and we build in the sort of STEM credentialing feeder system, this could be for the many, right? And it particularly can be for people who are living right around the medical district. Because when you come back into a central city, as opposed to being in an isolated suburban park, you are surrounded by neighborhoods of high poverty, right? And there are people in those neighborhoods, particularly young adults, who, if they could be nurtured at young age, if they can be exposed to the innovation that's happening literally a half a mile away or a quarter mile away, can basically come along for the ride. But right now, there's only a small portion of people living in nearby neighborhoods that are working in the district, but education, skills, and exposure. Because Americans, we tend to hide a lot of our innovation, outside of these gadgets we walk around with. But the amazing innovation that's happening within the buildings in the medical district and now with GE are incredible. Let's expose our kids to it, and let's expose particularly some of the folks living in nearby neighborhoods. So that's the setup. That's the diagnostic. It's all not a rosy picture, but you have some strengths, and most importantly, you have some distinctive strengths, right? You have a convergence potentially between energy and healthcare that only a dozen places in the world have. There are high barriers to entry here. You just can't create this stuff, right? So you have it. Now the question is, how do you build on it? Scott Andes, this is your life.
Thanks, Bruce. So what I'm going to be walking through is we have 3 series of recommendations around innovation, placemaking, and inclusion. I'll be talking about 2 of our recommendations that have many pieces to them around innovation. So when we think about innovation, I should just be clear what our goal is. Our goal is not around the scientific discovery. Our goal is not around new sort of research protocols at the universities and research labs, which we think are great. Our goal is around job creation and industry development. And so what our recommendations are really looking at is how to propel Oklahoma City's regional economy by way of the strengths in the district. So we've broken this up into essentially 2 recommendations. And the way that I would think about this is think about innovation to economic growth as a pipeline. At the beginning of that pipeline, you have translational research, and that's just research that has market value. So we're going to be focusing on that, and then how to bring that commercial application to the market in one recommendation. And that's to create a Center for Energy and Health collaboration. Then a second recommendation takes off from there that really focuses on creating new companies and startups around a suite of technologies and opportunities. And then finally, to get to the end goal, which is industry and job creation, you need an economic development play in the district that can help aggregate demand, that can help motivate companies to come look at the area and consider how to retain and attract talent. So the first recommendation really is pretty clear, I think, and this is picking up on 2 of your largest clusters in both the district and the region. Energy and health together already employ tens of thousands of workers in your region. It attracts millions of public and private investment in research, and yet, to date, as Bruce was saying, they've largely developed in isolation. You'd have substantial healthcare research in the district, and you've had substantial amount of energy research and economic activity in the broader region. We think that there's an opportunity here to bring these together in a substantial fashion. And so essentially what we're thinking here is to create a major point of connection between these macro sectors in the economy around, first, translational science, and then second, around commercialization. So what do I mean by that? So first, and I'll get into a couple of details in the end, but essentially the center would be a powerful link between the research that's occurring already in the district and the economic activity in the region. So this would entail both bringing in industry partners, it would entail finding strategic niches in the research line. So for example, if OU or OMRF are working on something particular around imaging, there needs to be an opportunity to identify strategic partners, both public and private, around the country, bring them into the district, and have them support the translational research capacity of the overall district and region. So this would also include what we would consider to be a translational research and commercialization office. Essentially what that means is we want to force multiply the research that's happening in academia and its intersection with industry. So we think this could happen in 2 substantial steps. First, around translational research, is we need greater opportunities, both physical and programmatic, to bring industry partners into the district. And this could mean working with companies that are, a quarter mile away, or companies that are strategic assets that are located in other continents. There are global partnerships, both in terms of capital and research, that are untapped in the district. And second, commercialization occurs differently in innovation districts than it does in universities or national laboratories, in that there are multiple types of entities that can play a role. So we want to aggregate some of that activity and consider what would it look like to have a fully staffed, fully funded concierge service of sorts, where there are people roaming the halls at all the different institutions and identifying where there are strategic opportunities to promote research into the commercial realm, bring industry partners in, identify areas where researchers are working hard at linkages between business partners, and really sort of expand that across the district. This is happening, to be sure, at the individual institutions, but we can aggregate that in a way that I think can really sort of impact the overall efforts of the district. So this is sort of the first piece of the puzzle, and this is, and I should be clear, we really do think that energy and health is sort of the sort of first 2 technology clusters that makes the most sense for the district, simply because of your strengths, but they should be viewed as a starting point. They shouldn't be viewed as an end goal. In reality, the technology platforms that Bruce was talking about, be it robotics, be it fluid flow dynamics or others, they apply to a multiple of industries. So here, while we're talking about starting with energy and health, we're really talking about expanding to agriculture, to aerospace, to advanced manufacturing. You have plays in these technology categories across a slew of industries that you can really build upon. So that's, I would say, step one, is to make sure that the research that's going on has relationships to industries. And we'll talk a little bit about what that could look like at the end. So what do best practices really look like? And this isn't, while this is not an easy thing to do, there are practices around the country that have done this phenomenally well. The first example is the Indiana Biosciences Research Institute. Essentially, this is an arm of an organization called BioCrossroads, but what it does is it has brought together 5 major life science businesses. It's Cook Medical, Roche, Lilly, Dow, major companies, and then also identified in the state of Indiana particular research areas at Indiana University, Notre Dame, and Purdue, and together they've identified 2 areas where where there's market demand and academic research strength. Those are in nutrition and metabolic disease. And together, the industry has put in tens of millions of dollars into collaborative research space. They've identified researchers that they work with around the world, brought them to Indianapolis to work at Indianapolis's facility to organize a pre-competitive amount of research that simply is to say research where all the industry partners can work together in Indianapolis. Today, it's leveraged $150 million in capital. And again, that's vast. The vast majority of that is from the private sector and philanthropy. So there's a value proposition that's been created around the research strengths that are highly specific to industry and academia. The second example is the Commonwealth Center for Advanced Manufacturing in Virginia. Essentially, this is a 160,000 square foot research facility where Siemens, Alcoa, Rolls-Royce all work with Virginian universities to work on research together and technologies that the universities are good at, but the industries actually need a lot of collaboration around. And again, industry funded, what the universities and research facilities bring to the table is they change their strategic direction to meet industry needs. These are all multi-million-dollar investments. They aren't easy things to do, but this is sort of the mountaintop for translational research and really should be the gold standard of what you look at. So if the first recommendation is around your 2 major industry clusters that you can build out, energy and health, and around science, essentially, what's the next step? Well, the reality is translating science into industry partnerships alone will not produce economic value. In addition to that, you need a much more robust entrepreneurship pipeline in the district and economic development strategies. And here, we actually don't think that this should be isolated to energy and health. You need more capacity in general. So first, around entrepreneurship, there really needs to be substantial effort to bolster the amount of young companies that are coming out of both the anchor institutions and companies, and also then entrepreneurs in the region coming into the district to work with those anchors. So you actually are, in terms of entrepreneurship, in a great starting position. You've got an organization, I2E, that's a statewide organization that's nationally recognized to work on these types of activities. But I2E is a statewide organization. There needs to be either them or someone interested in specifically what's going on in the district and district opportunities and entrepreneurship. Second of all, you need to think more about economic development in the district. And what districts across the world are really beginning to do is they're thinking about how to aggregate demand. And what that means is there a company around the world that has a strategic relationship to one of either the research lines at a university or at our other research institution? Or is there a good opportunity to bring in a company that makes sense for the research park? The question is, who's waking up every single day thinking about economic development for the district? Again, similar to entrepreneurship, you've got the chamber that does substantial amount of economic development. There needs to be a play here specifically for the district that helps aggregate that demand and implement economic development strategies around talent attraction and retention within the district. And so I'll give an example of both here. So Drexel University, Drexel Ventures in Philadelphia, we really like this model because it's a way of building entrepreneurship within a university that really has sort of a separation of powers. So on the one hand, you've got Drexel University that has a phenomenal engineering program and has a high interest in entrepreneurship. On the other hand, they don't have a ton of experience actually building those entrepreneurs. So they've partnered with Ben Franklin, which is essentially the entrepreneurship organization in the state of Pennsylvania. Philadelphia has its own branch. So Ben Franklin runs the entrepreneurship side of the seed venture. They identify companies and students that have market-ready ideas, while Drexel University supports it from an academic perspective and supports some of the funding. It's a new model. It's leveraged about $10 million split between the two parties, but it really seems to be a good model of how some of this can work. The second example is, I can't actually see it. That stands for I can't see the acronym, so I'm going to look at my notes. I'm cheating. It stands for the Global Cardiovascular Innovation Center. Okay, yeah. How did you see this when you were up here? No idea. So anyway, the Cardiovascular Center, this really is an economic development arm of the Cleveland Clinic. So it's an incredibly interesting model where the Third Frontier in Ohio, which was the statewide innovation play, invested $60 million, so not a trivial amount, into a center that would go around the world and identify companies that met the cardiovascular needs of the Cleveland Clinic and Cleveland's overall region. So essentially, they've attracted companies around the world to their district that met not just, it wasn't just simply about who was going to bring the most jobs at the get-go, but who met strategic research needs. It's been phenomenally successful. It's helped, I think it's leveraged, for every $1 of state money, it's brought in $19 of private sector investment. These are the types of economic development strategies around districts that can really move the needle. And then I won't go through this slide. You can find it online. But we're not Pollyannish at Brookings. We know that to make the Innovation District the center of the universe for energy and health, and to be a prodigious producer of serial entrepreneurs, it's going to take more than 6 months. I mean, you need at least 4 to 5 years, no doubt. That was a joke. So we've developed something of a 10-year strategy here around 4 areas in these recommendations. 1, real estate development. 2, translational science. 3, entrepreneurship. And 4, economic development. And again, you can find this slide online. But essentially, something John Westeride said to me, a phrase that I've now stolen and used 30 or 40 times, is that impact equals mass times acceleration. So on the one hand, there are ways to get quick wins along these initiatives, and that builds the value proposition for what eventually will need to be a substantial amount of capital leverage, not just from if you're looking for the state, that's probably foolhardy, but building over the next 10 years, we really think that the Innovation District along these 4 areas, energy and health and entrepreneurship and economic development, can really propel the region as a whole to be a global destination around innovation. And there needs to be sequential and a clear business model moving forward about how to start going in the next 6 months with things that cost very, very little, to thinking ambitious about how you're going to leverage what will eventually be in the neighborhood of tens of millions of dollars. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Meg.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be back in Oklahoma City. And I'm here to tell you that place matters. I'm building on what Bruce talked about, the importance of density, proximity, vitality, and walkability. These are really key to a successful innovation district. And as you know, if you want to become a world-class science and technology center and a world-class city, you really need to have a world-class environment for people to work in, for people to live in, for people to play in. Now, innovation districts around the country are densifying and diversifying, and many that have been in office parks up until now are transforming them into urban environments that allow people to live, work, and play around the clock. Really, a huge transformation is going on around the country in these kinds of, whether they're located in cities, outside of cities, there's a huge effort to really transform them. For example, Raleigh-Durham Research Triangle, which is a very large office park, essentially, is building a mixed-use development that will allow people to live there. There'll be restaurants, there will be retail activities, so people really will be able to live in this area. The city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, is now requiring in Kendall Square, which is the innovation district located next to MIT, requiring that all new development have 75% retail on the ground floor. And a lot of the surface parking lots and single-use buildings in Kendall Square are being redeveloped into mixed-use buildings with residential, startup space, and active commercial uses on the ground floors. So this is your competition. It's happening around the country. So we are recommending that your Oklahoma City Innovation District work with the city and the state to promote new mixed-use development, placemaking, and connectivity so that it too can become a lively and livable community. So how are we going to do this? So I've been meeting, and Project for Public Spaces has been meeting with Placemaking Task Force for the last 8 months. It's been a terrific group of people who represent all of the, I think, the major portion of the institutions and research facilities in the health center. Come up with a lot of great ideas. And there's many more in the report. I am summarizing sort of the top 5 that we think will help to transform this environment into this, your health center environment into a really lively and active and diverse place. First, land use changes. And as you know, I guess the majority, most of the health center, maybe not all of the innovation district, but most of the health center is in the Capital Medical Center Improvement and Zoning District. That's a mouthful, but that's overseen by the state and the State Zoning Commission. And one of the recommendations that we've been discussing with our placemaking task force is to change those regulations so that we get a diversity of uses within the health center, not just research and medical and a limited number, but really a diverse number so that you can have commercial development, so that you can have restaurants and cafes, so that you can have residential uses within the health center. And Ben Davis is on the Zoning Commission. He's going to be talking about that in a little while, so he can go into some of the details. But that's, I think, at the state now, being reviewed by the state legislature and the governor. So hopefully that's going to happen very quickly so that development, new types of development can happen within the health center. And there are sites on which to develop. There's not only lots of surface parking lots, but even spaces around some of the existing buildings could really become much more vibrant types of spaces with exciting ground floor uses with eyes on the street. So changing the suburban development pattern, diversifying the uses is really critical at that larger scale to get the right kind of development to happen. Second, placemaking. And placemaking is about activating public spaces and improving public spaces to bring people together, to really create spaces for socializing, to create spaces for community to come together. That's the way we approach it. In a health, in an innovation district and in your health center, these public spaces, whether inside or out, should be the places where your knowledge workers can come together and have, whether it's spontaneous interaction where they can exchange ideas in the coffee shop, or a formal program that brings them together, such as the one that happened actually just last month, the imaging symposium that happened at GE, which formally brings people together. I think of these all as kind of placemaking opportunities because they're going to happen in a space, whether it's an existing public space, or a new auditorium, or a great facility like this one, but it's going to happen in a place, and it should be happening within the health center on an everyday basis. So there's the formal event, and then the kind of spontaneous things that can happen every day. If people can get out of those buildings, get out of the cafeterias, eat in local restaurants, buy coffee down the street within your health center, then they will have the opportunity to actually exchange ideas with other employees in the area. And it is also important to think about how the community surrounding the innovation district can profit from the placemaking. How can they get involved in helping to program it and in creating opportunities for the kids in the neighborhood to actually come in and enjoy some of the spaces within the health center? And our task force identified 10 or 11 spaces, public spaces and privately owned public spaces, that could be energized, activated right away, building on what's already happened, whether it's Stanton L. Young Walk or the Sacred Valley Park, where there's a food truck rally in the fall on Wednesdays. These kinds of things could be expanded. You can start immediately to do these things. We call that lighter, quicker, cheaper interventions. You don't have to wait. You can start to actually program these spaces right away. So the third piece is about connectivity, and actually both within and without the health center and the innovation district. And first of all, connectivity over to Automobile Alley. It's really only a half mile away from the center of the health center. It's really, for a New Yorker, it's an easy walk. But, as Bruce said, but it's not a pleasant walk, and it's not a, it doesn't always feel like a safe walk walking across that bridge. So I'm going to show you a couple of ideas about how you can improve these kinds of walks. But the city is already thinking about how biking and walking can be improved on 13th Street and on Lottie Boulevard. They're planning in their recent plans. They're showing new bike lanes and new sidewalks. So in fact, beginning to think about reducing the width of these roadways, which are actually significantly wide and are a deterrent to actually crossing over into the neighborhoods, reducing them in width and adding and making them into what we call complete streets, so people can walk safely, bike safely, and drive slowly and safely. And I think the leadership of the Innovation District can be thinking about how you could do the same things to 10th Street and all the way across to Automobile Alley to really make it a great walking space. And then within the health center, bike and pedestrian mobility can also be enhanced through complete streets, through better streetscape, but also by programming. And one of the ideas that the task force came up with is actually putting on recreational walking programs, like an event or a 5K run. So creating almost like a walking loop through the health center that both employees and visitors and the neighborhood could even use. So, but actually sparking it with some walking events. And finally, making the district more porous. The health center is really like an island that is barricaded off from everything around it, whether it's by I-235 on the west, or even Lincoln Boulevard for that matter, 8th Street, Lottie Boulevard, and then these huge surface parking lots that really separate the medical school from the neighborhood to the east. These are like barricades, and we talked a lot about how can you break down these barricades? Well, there's several things one could do. Just making these streets more crossable is one thing, adding the sidewalks that I was talking about, making it easier to get across, first of all, and safer to get across. But also thinking about this as an opportunity to actually build along the edge facilities, recreational places that both the neighborhood and the employees within the Innovation District can use. For example, a park in place of a gigantic parking lot, where people could come out and use the recreational facilities, whether you're a worker or a neighbor, or a kid in the neighborhood. A basketball court, for example, or volleyball, or something that people could do after work and the kids could get involved in. Or a community center with the opportunities for both recreational uses and even perhaps job training or makerspace. And that could be right on the edge of the health district, in the health center, so that it could serve both the residential neighborhood and the innovation district. So some examples. Great placemaking is already happening in Oklahoma City, and I think you should be lauded for what is already going on. There's a wonderful organization called Sisters in Motion that is promoting walking and getting folks out in walking programs, which I think we've talked about incorporating into the Innovation District. This is an opportunity to, as I was saying, to create sort of recreational walking programs, and you have an organization that could actually run something like that. And then there's great placemaking going on downtown. Downtown OKC is a terrific organization which has done the Bricktown Beach, for example, doing other activations of public space. They could be a partner going forward as well. They have a lot of experience in doing kind of unique programming that's unique to Oklahoma City. Now, some examples from outside. Well, one of the things that a lot of innovation districts is doing is building these hubs or public innovation halls. There's one in Boston called District Hall, which is pretty well known. This one, the Frontier, is in the Raleigh-Durham Research Triangle, and it was an underutilized, actually I think it was an empty office building that was transformed into a hub of activity. So it has incubators in it. It has small spaces for entrepreneurs, for startups. But it also has a cafe, and it has all kinds of programming that bring people together. And it's attracting entrepreneurs young entrepreneurs too, from throughout the region, who otherwise would not have a reason to go to the Research Triangle Park. So this is becoming a real model around the country for how you can kind of create this hub of activity that we've been talking about. And then outside, in Wake Forest, North Carolina, the Innovation Quarter there has created a park where they program it all day long. They've got yoga in the morning, they've got food trucks in the afternoon, they've got concerts at night, and they share it with the neighborhood. And so the community around it, which is a low-income neighborhood, is also using it for programming that they want to do. And finally, I just wanted to blow your mind with some ideas for the bridge. So imagine if crossing I-235 on a bridge like this. So pedestrian bridges, and you've got a terrific pedestrian bridge, the one that goes to I guess, your riverfront. This is a work of art. It's called the Helix Bridge in Singapore. It could provide shade. It could provide, lighting at night. And it would be like a beacon from afar. Imagine driving on I-235 and seeing something like this. So what I'm saying is you don't necessarily have to build a cap, but you could build a world-class pedestrian bridge that would really attract people to it. It would be a destination. And then in Indianapolis, they've built, you've probably heard of the Cultural Trail. So they have actually narrowed a lot of their wide roadways and created a walking path and a biking path that serves people from, all over Indianapolis come and use it, but also visitors love to use it, and it connects all their major cultural and historic destinations within and outside of their downtown. It's become a major attraction, and it also has great public art along it, great landscaping, but it's really getting people out and walking around. So these are just examples from other cities, but you in Oklahoma City can build something unique. You can build on the assets that you already have and do some terrific placemaking that will be like nowhere else in the world. So I have no doubt that it could happen right here. So thank you. I'm going to pass it on to Jennifer.
Okay, I'm going to bring us home here for the last part of the presentation. So what I'm going to focus on is the diversity and inclusion aspect of this. This is something that came up in a lot of our conversations, recognizing the fact that you've got a great platform for growth and job growth in the health center area, in Automobile Alley, in the district as a whole. But that while you have a great platform for growth, we know, as you saw earlier, that 57% of the jobs that exist now in the district don't require a 4-year degree. Having that growth isn't necessarily enough. What you also need to have is very intentional efforts to help connect particularly low-income residents, whether they're in the surrounding communities or even in the broader region, to the growth that is happening. So our fourth recommendation here is really about how can you do that? What's going to take to promote that intentionality? And our recommendation is that you actually create a standing committee that really focuses on diversity and inclusion. And in fact, in the new project plan, the new TIF plan, it actually calls for, in that document, an education committee. And what we did is say, let's broaden that out a little bit to focus on education, but to also focus on some of the other major components that involve diversity and inclusion. So, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, it's not just the nice thing to do. It's an important thing to do because economic development should really be about promoting broad-based opportunity. At the same time, when we talk about the innovation economy, I think we can all recognize that it behooves us to be bringing in more diversity into that economy. When it comes to innovation, we want a diversity of backgrounds and perspectives that are contributing to that kind of innovative growth. So on that front, we think as part of the governance, and I'll get to that sort of at the end, in terms of the governance and organizing, that nested within that there should be a committee that really focuses on this, and that should really highlight several major areas. So first of all, it's focusing on the education piece. So when we're talking about the innovation economy, this is about the longer-term game, growing that longer-term talent pipeline that you're going to need for the innovation economy, both for the high-end jobs, but also those middle-skill jobs. So what does that look like? Well, we think that this is a committee that should really be working with the whole range of stakeholders in the education sector, whether it's the public school systems, the universities, community colleges, the career tech institutions that can really help start to draw those connections between the growth that's happening, the industries in the innovation district, and helping to prepare those students over the long haul for those jobs. And that can happen both within the traditional education system, but also via things like internships, mentorships, apprenticeship programs, after-school programs, summer camps that focus on STEM, and other types of curriculum to really help both generate that interest in what happens in the innovation economy, but also start to develop those skills and start to develop even kind of the matchmaking that's going to be required. In addition to education, it's really about the workforce development piece. So, they sort of go hand in hand. If we think about education and growing that long-term pipeline, you also have, as we know, very high poverty located just outside the district. How do you start to think about the existing adult workers and better connecting them into the innovation economy? And what kind of workforce programming will it take, working with existing providers, for example, to start to really make those connections between the jobs that exist in the innovation district and particularly those low-income residents that are right outside of it. And there's some great examples. For example, in Philadelphia, they have something called the West Philadelphia Skills Initiative that actually does just that. It focuses on working directly with some of the major institutions in their innovation district, Drexel, Penn, and others, working with them to identify some of the occupations that they have that actually have a lot of high turnover. So again, this isn't altruism. This is really about these institutions saying, look, we have jobs here that we struggle to retain workers because people don't necessarily have the right hard skills or the right soft skills to be able to stay in these positions. So they're actually working directly with this initiative to help develop some of that curriculum targeted at the surrounding neighborhoods to help fill those positions. And it's been very successful, and the fact that it's place-based really helps, because when it comes to attrition and what sometimes keeps people from staying in jobs, transportation and other things can be real barriers. So this is a real opportunity to start to really draw, through workforce programming, better and stronger connections to the surrounding communities. Another key part of this is around business development and entrepreneurship. So, when we talk about what it means to have, an inclusive economy and promoting broad-based opportunities, sure, it's about jobs, it's about education and workforce, but it's how do you start to create the kind of opportunities to have more, a bigger diversity in terms of who's actually owning businesses and who has the ability to start those businesses, and how do you help local businesses grow. So here's a real opportunity to say, look, you've got major institutions in this area with major purchasing power. So how, by way of example, can you develop procurement initiatives that really focus on that local buying that both helps new businesses start and sort of get into the game, but also help other businesses expand? So how can you start to generate that kind of collective demand, and how can a committee like this work with a lot of the major players? And there's examples, and I'll get to a couple in a moment, from around the country that have done just this, that have developed procurement initiatives to say, look, we understand that from an economic development perspective, there's a real opportunity here with our purchasing power to really support that local economy and support those local businesses, both to help give them the capacity to grow and expand, but also give them those contracts to enable them to meet our market demand. And finally, the last piece, and Meg touched on this as well, is really about that placemaking component. How do you, as this innovation district grows, how do you create a place that people feel like they're part of? That it's not something that's hidden behind gates, or that, oh, well, that's what happens over there, but I don't see myself in that. I don't have any reason to go beyond maybe now for healthcare services. Well, one, you're going to start to create that, hopefully, as you have more job connections and more people working from the surrounding communities in the district. But also at another level, how do you make this feel like a place where people feel welcome, where they might come for different kind of public programming that's being offered, where they might be able to start to have relationships with workers in the district around mentoring opportunities? How do you think over the longer haul about creating those kind of spaces that just bring the community together, whether that's happening within the innovation district itself, or whether it's starting to bring the innovation district out into the local communities? So, for example, you have the Paige Woodson School that's being redeveloped. What are the opportunities there around programming and bringing people together in that kind of space? Over the longer haul, what are the chances to be maybe developing a community center or recreational kind of facilities that everybody, both from the district but also from the surrounding neighborhoods, can utilize? So there's the lighter, quicker, cheaper kind of opportunities to bring people into the district and make them feel like they're really a part of the growth that's happening. And then there's those longer term, those long game opportunities to think about the kind of spaces that can help facilitate that. So, on one hand, this committee, these are the 4 areas of focus that we think a committee working with, obviously, all the relevant players in the community along these lines can do. But then it's important to have kind of this committee that serves as that liaison between them, because none of these things are necessarily, exclusive to one another, but who's really kind of connecting the dots between these type of activities, whether it's business development and placemaking and education, and really serving as that liaison, that standing liaison to really help activate these kind of programming. So just a couple of best practices. I named the West Philly Skills Initiative already from the workforce perspective. A few others. In my hometown of Baltimore, Johns Hopkins University launched what they call the Be Local program. There's a component of it that's the Hopkins Local, where they did a few things. One, on the workforce end, really focusing on how to draw from the local community, particularly at Hopkins Hospital, more local workers into their system. They're a major employer, the biggest in the city, or the largest in the state of Maryland. So how can they start really getting more aggressive about their hiring? But also it has a major focus on buying local. So this is, Hopkins itself doing more local purchasing. In fact, I just happened to be in the Hopkins cafeteria with family members over the weekend, because it's a great place to take kids. And all their food is local. They buy from local farms, they buy their local ice cream, and they really promote that as something they're doing, and it helps stimulate the local economy. But also, when you think about all the things that a major university and hospital system like Hopkins buys, they're really trying to focus on how they're building the capacity within the community on goods and services. What's interesting about Hopkins Local is it has this bigger B local, Baltimore local component, where they're actually working with other industries and firms throughout Baltimore City and the region to do the same. So they've gotten commitments from dozens now of different private sector actors to focus on their own and re-examine their own hiring and purchasing, again, with the goal of stimulating the local economy. And then a second example on the procurement front is out of Chicago. Chicago Anchors for a Strong Economy. Kind of similar idea to the Hopkins Local, where they're really focusing on that matchmaking between local businesses, their own, the Chicago anchor institutions. It's sort of a consortium of anchor institutions, and kind of aggregating their local demand to really stimulate business development. Okay, so this brings us to the last piece here. How do we pull all this together? And this is really about what we refer to as organizing for success. For this innovation district to really take off, for it to really be that center of energy and economic development for innovation and for the larger Oklahoma City regional economy, what will it take to get there from here? So, as we've set up here for about the last hour that we've been talking with you, you've got so much potential here. You've got this major concentration of actors in this innovation district. But like in many of these districts, they tend to have been more or less operating in their own silos. And that's not to say that there aren't collaborations that are happening at sort of different levels within them. But right now, there's no one organization that wakes up every day thinking about how to stimulate the innovation economy and build that innovation ecosystem in this district, in this space. So what we recommend in the report is to think very clearly and carefully about how you establish, whether it's a new entity or whether it's sort of repurposing an existing entity, to really focus on this governance piece. And so what does that really mean in terms of what will it take to get you there from this organizational standpoint? Well, for one thing, it means that you actually need to have some sort of leader. Again, that person who's thinking about this every day, ideally with a few staff to help support them. But this is somebody who really also understands the innovation ecosystem. The place piece is enormously important. The inclusion piece is enormously important. But at the end of the day, we're also talking about innovation. And it's somebody who understands the nexus between innovation and place and diversity and inclusion and is pulling it all together. But they really need to understand the innovation ecosystem. They need to understand the firms and the institutions that are in the district to really be able to drive this kind of change and to have the ability to coordinate the various actors towards the ends that we've been talking about. It needs, in addition to having that executive director and the staff working with them, it also needs more of a leadership structure, a steering kind of committee of the very high-level actors who are the major stakeholders within the district ecosystem and in some cases within the broader regional ecosystem where those connections should be made. So it's having that kind of umbrella kind of steering committee that's guiding the process as we move forward and guiding the strategy development and the implementation, and most importantly, guiding the vision. What is the macro vision that you're trying to get at from 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years down the line? What do you want this place to be, and how can this steering kind of group help get you there? It's certainly about having those committees underneath it. So if you have an executive director and a few staff and a steering group, they're not going to be able to do this all on their own, clearly. So it's, having those kind of subgroups, whether it's the Center on Health and Energy that Scott described, whether it's the Diversity Inclusion Committee that I described, perhaps a separate task force that focuses on placemaking. It's creating and aggregating the various players that exist both within the district and outside of the district together to be able to actually implement the strategies, because everything that we've recommended here invokes a lot of different actors, some more in the innovation space, some more on the place space, some at the nexus between the two, some at the inclusion. So it's, having this kind of umbrella structure, but also having embedded within it, at least initially, some of these things may eventually sort of, stand on their own, but to actually do the strategy development and the strategy implementation. And then finally, and I kind of referenced this, is that you need that overall support. Who's providing that glue over time? Who's connecting all the dots over time? And importantly, who's being able to raise the funds to be able to do it? Because at the end of the day, that's going to require a major commitment by the players here. And it's, to be able to do any of the recommendations that we said, some things are the lighter, quicker, cheaper. Other things are the long-term play that are going to take some serious leveraging of a lot of capital. And so you need to have this kind of organizational body that has the capacity to do that, because that's what it's going to take. So I have the last word, so I'll just wrap up by saying, for the couple years that we've been engaged here, I think, for us, this has been a really interesting and exciting project. It's given us a chance to really play out on the ground these connections between innovation and place, working with MEG and PPS, and opportunity and inclusion. It's been a great group of people. We really, thank the Chamber and everyone else who has been part of the task forces. And who was just, engaged with us, whether through interviews and through all the meetings we've had. It's been a great opportunity to just be in this community where we really see the potential. I certainly hope that potential was really reflected here. And we know that there's, so much opportunity here. And we think that there's, the momentum to get it to happen. And, at the end of the day, one thing that struck us from kind of day one is this is a place that really knows how to get things done. If you look at your MAPS program, if you look at, the redevelopment of the memorial, this is a place that when you've set your mind to do something, you've made some really great things happen. And you can see it in your downtown, you can see it in your parks, you can see it in the memorial, you can see it in your infrastructure. And so now there's another real opportunity to help drive your economy and propel it forward, given these major assets that you have in the district and in your broader region. So we really look forward in the years to come to see how this all unfolds, and we expect great things to happen. So thank you.
Bruce, Scott, Meg, Jennifer, thank y'all. Give them a round of applause again. We're going to take a very short break. We want to stay on time. We're going to get you out of here before lunch. But I did want to tell you that contrary to what you might be thinking, we didn't wait for this report to come out to start working. There have been multiple task forces put together. They have really dug in. They've not only came up with ideas, they have also started implementing ideas. And they're going to tell you too that we need your engagement and your input in making these even more effective. So that's what we're going to do right after the break, is hear from the task forces so that you can better understand what they have already done, what they're currently doing, and what they have planned for the future. So we're going to take about a 7 or 8 minute break, be back at 10:40. We'll herd you back in here, and then we'll conclude right before lunch. Thank you.